Welcome back to the Faith Forward podcast. John Ackerman, Brian Bales. This is week 3 of 4 in our approach to Easter, which makes it, Brian?
The penultimate.
Indeed it is. So thanks for being a part of this journey as we've gone through these 4 weeks leading up to Easter Sunday. And we're talking about the resurrection, but we're talking about how the resurrection is not just information that informs our life, but it's a reality that transforms our life, that rewrites our story.
Yeah.
And so in the first week of this series, you talked about how the resurrection rewrites our shame. At an identity level, we are not who we think we are,
Right.
and we are not who the enemy so often accuses us of being. We have a new life and a new identity because of the empty tomb. In week 2, we had Pastor Lee here. We were talking about how the resurrection rewrites not only what we hope for, but how we hope. And now this week, we're going to talk about how the resurrection rewrites our story from the standpoint of power through surrender.
Yeah.
So, as always, we encourage you to check out the message in its entirety from Sunday, but recognizing that many of you catch this days, weeks, months later. Brian, what's a short recap of Sunday's message?
Well, one of the problems I was trying to highlight at the beginning, and if you ever heard someone speak, especially me, in a Sunday type of format called a sermon or a talk, depending on there, is often you want to highlight a problem right up front. And it's not that the text doesn't do it, but I think when people can recognize, oh, I know what that's like up front, we tend to listen a little bit more. And I think almost every one of us know what it's like to be stuck, that emotive feeling of being stuck. And one of the tensions when we talk about the resurrection rewriting our story is that we talked in week 1 that we are new creatures. We are no longer identified by our shame, but we're identified by being sons and daughters of God, the privilege that comes with that. But yet, many times, while we have a new position, we still feel the same. This idea, I used an analogy on Sunday, when, say, someone has had really, really bad spending habits. Not necessarily, something that happened to them that caused them to have to declare bankruptcy, but they have done something in a very poor way, and then they have bankruptcy declared. Positionally, they sit differently.
Yeah.
They sit completely different, but you know what's still there? That muscle memory, that old way of thinking. There is a process, which is why lots of times in certain bankruptcies, you have to go through counseling. You have to figure out, what was it about you? And really, that's sort of an analogy of what we're talking about here today, that when we understand that the resurrection rewrites our story, it changes us. We're no longer dead in our trespasses of sin. We're no longer assigned an identity of shame, but our spirit becomes alive in Christ. But our mind, our emotions, and our will, they still have a lot of muscle memory habits that have to be progressively changed, so to speak. And that's why we're stuck. And the resurrection, what's so interesting is that, especially when we're looking into 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which has been the basis text. And if you don't know this, the resurrection chapter in Scripture is 1 Corinthians 15. We'd often look to the Gospels, but 1 Corinthians 15 talks more about the resurrection than any other chapter in the New Testament. It talks about something different, that we don't have to wait to a someday power in order to experience right now change in our life. And actually, the people who would have been reading 1 Corinthians 15 actually thought they had to wait to someday. So the good news of the resurrection isn't just good news that changes our identity and our spirit. It changes our ability to live right now with power. But what you just said is, it is, I don't know what the word look is, but it's the opposite of what we might think. Great, I can live with power. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And the answer actually is surrender. And by the way, surrender isn't passive. It still takes a lot of work, but it's a whole lot different than what we think it is. So the issue is that we often want God to let us rewrite our story in our power, right? And God didn't come to change our situations. He came to change our source, who can change our situations. And that's what we sort of really dive into, that the resurrection, while it does change where our eternal destiny is, because of the same resurrection power, it says in 1 Corinthians 15, that rose Jesus from the dead, exists in us right now, if we have a relationship with Jesus Christ. the life and life to the full that Jesus said he came for in John chapter 10, verse 10, is not a theoretical, abstract concept that only applies to other people who may have read this in its original context. It applies to any of us who have that relationship with Jesus. But it requires, John, some rewriting of our thoughts and belief. And I really want to say this, even when saying rewriting, the natural inclination we can hear about this, I need to rewrite this. You can't. I can't. And in a world where saying I can't seems like we're saying something negative about ourselves, we're saying the truthful, most helpful thing, because only when we get to the point of I can't will we really surrender where we need to. It's analogous to, John, that old statement is that oftentimes people don't change until the pain of changing is less than the pain of staying the same. In this way, oftentimes people don't surrender, and it doesn't need to be this way, till the pain or the difficulty becomes so bad that they say, well, I can't do anything else but this. And Jesus is like, good, this is where I need you to be. This is where I need you to be.
Yeah. And so as we turn, as we always try to how do I make this practical? How do I take what happened on Sunday and let it take root in a way that actually brings about transformation, not through my own effort, but in many cases through new understanding. Not just new information, but new understanding through the true definition of the word repentance, that I'm thinking differently now after an encounter with truth and reality and God, that now I see differently, I feel differently, I think differently. And so as you said, there's some thoughts and beliefs that have to get rewritten. And so right away, we're not talking about the level of intellect. We're not talking about the level of information. We're not talking about whether or not you can recite 1 Corinthians 15. We're talking about, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And so Lee and I were talking last week. I think some of it may have made it into the episode, but a lot of the conversation happened after the fact, where we were talking about historically, we've inherited a heart-level theology of this life is pretty awful, but someday is heaven.
Yeah.
And thank goodness for that. And so let's just muddle through as best we can. And so if that's not just an intellectual thought, but a heart-level conviction, then the empty tomb really doesn't rewrite my story. Jesus being raised from the dead and that same resurrection power being given to transform my life is for a someday time. And so one of the things that we have to come to terms with is that still what I deeply believe? That this life is just pain and suffering, but someday I get to go to heaven and life's going to get better. And if that's not the one that resonates, there may be some other ones. It may be not so much that this life is just pain and suffering, but it's that, well, Jesus was raised from the dead through God's resurrection power, and so that means I'm now supposed to live a better life. Jesus was raised from the dead with God's resurrection power, and I am now supposed to live in such a way that that power is available, but I don't really bother God for it. I don't ask for help because God expects me to figure this out and to do this right and really just come to him as a last resort. And if any of that feels like it resonates deep down here at a heart level, that's part of the story that has to be rewritten. There's some new thoughts and new beliefs that get to take root there as part of rewriting our story. Because the story is resurrection power is available now in abundance, and life abundant is available now. And the way you get it, folks, is through surrender and death. And if you just turned us off right now, you won't hear anything that follows. And so I don't know why I'm referencing that part of the audience, but if you're still with us, this is actually really, really good news. It's just uncomfortable.
It is.
Because it means there's some things that we have to give up. And not just in the area of comfort, but in the area of heart-level belief. Some of us, in a weird sort of way, have held on to with a level of grim satisfaction. This life is just difficult, but someday it gets better, because that lens just seems to make the most sense out of my world. But what if that's not true? Well, if that's not true, then my whole story has to be viewed differently. And the way that I respond to my whole story has to be viewed differently. If I've held on to the lens of, I'm supposed to, don't bother God, don't ask for help, God expects me to, again, there may be a level of just grim satisfaction that, all right, it's up to me, and I love it when things are up to me, and if I have to bet on anybody, I'm going to bet on me to come through, and God, you're going to be proud of me when I do.
Look what I did for you. Yeah.
And so allowing that to be set aside may come at a cost at first, because I don't know how to live if I don't live that way. And so we come back to the scriptures where Jesus says in Mark 8, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways. And that's not just the greedy, manipulative, I want more money and a bigger house.
Yeah, John, I'm glad you brought that up, and I hopped in the middle of what you're saying. Go ahead and finish.
Turn from your selfish ways, which is also your self-focused ways, your self-sufficient ways, your self-reliant ways. Take up your cross and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you'll save it.
I really appreciate how you expand on that idea of selfish, because without even trying, we can think about selfish of things that are going to be for me and against you. I think oftentimes we use that term selfish. We think of that there is a winner and a loser. Like, I chose the last piece of pie for myself and you don't get it. That was selfish. And by the way, that would fit that definition. But it is much broader. This idea, especially when we're talking about God, the self-directed way that I want my life to win, to where the focus of decision-making is myself, not what God says, and surrender. And so I think when we think, certainly in this context, about this idea of selfish, think about who is at the center of the choices that you make. Whose thoughts are at the center of the choices that you make? And I think sometimes, I am fully confident that many times we're not even aware. Like, even John, I heard you say, things like, the world is awful and we just have to muddle through. Those are my words, not exactly how you said it. And so naturally we think, okay, John, that life and light at the full that you're talking about is God's going to make this world not awful. That actually isn't what it's saying either. Yeah. And then without even trying, we've accepted a truth that God is going to change our situation to make life and life to the full, but we've been self-directed in how we think that's supposed to happen. That sneaks in subtly, even like, oh, yeah, God can bring life to the full. So what does that mean? That means I'm going to get this job. That means this is going to happen. That means that particular difficult relationship is going to be solved either by them moving, taking a different job, or repenting, right? And none of those might be the case. Yeah. None of those might be the case. I'm always very cognizant of whenever I'm reading something in Scripture and Paul is talking about something, because I remember when he talks about in Philippians, he's from jail when he's writing that, and he says, I've learned to be content. I've learned to have this, not exactly life and life to the full as in John chapter 10, but it's in the same idea realm. And he's in prison. Right? No one got him out of prison. That person didn't leave, didn't take another job. No new prison guard came in, making his life easier. Yeah. But it's something about this idea of allowing the truth of the Holy Spirit into our lives to replace our old view. And not just our old view, but the culture. And again, we're part of culture. So lots of times when I use the culture of the world, we're part of that. But I'm saying any sort of idea, thought process of the culture of the world that we live in that says it's different than how God says it is.
Yeah. You'd reference Galatians 3 on Sunday.
Yeah.
And so just coming back to that, Paul's admonition to the Galatians, after reminding them that they're being foolish. Did you receive the Holy Spirit by obeying the law of Moses? Of course not. You received the Spirit because you believed the message you heard about Christ. How foolish can you be? After starting your Christian lives in the Spirit, why are you now trying to become perfect by your own human effort? And that's all of us, right? That gets to the heart of this issue of surrender. Are you going to try to do what only God can do for you by yourself? That is the epitome of foolishness, trying to do something yourself that you can't actually do, particularly when the one who can is standing right there offering to do it for you.
Yeah, I didn't do enough work on the word foolish, honestly. So I'm about to extrapolate on something that for those of you who want to look it up in Strong's, you can always send us an email to faithforward@cfcwire.org and tell me where I'm inaccurate on this. So I'm going to do this a little bit of remembering. I think it would be very, very easy to read, "Oh, foolish Galatians," translated, "Listen, you idiot dummies," right? Maybe, just maybe, that's not what he's saying. You have been fooled again. I used an illustration on Sunday that is actually a real one. And I don't know if you participated in Lent this year. Some people do, some people don't. And I'm not going to ask you, what you did or didn't give up. But as you know, Lent is something that we do. We usually give up something or do something in replacement of giving up something for a period of time, so that when we do that or don't do something, it refocuses us back to Jesus Christ and his sacrifice. I'm amazed at how many times that I participated in Lent in my lifetime where I'm in the middle of the Lenten season, and if it happens to be something that I've chose to abstain from, my muscle memory just kicks in and goes back to a way of doing it. And that is foolish in light of that, but it is not intentionally trying to do something differently. And I wonder, because for so much of the Galatians' life, for so much of our life, this is the way that it was done. Yeah. Right? How much of it, in some cases, is not just, I'm fighting against you, God, but the muscle memory of our soul, of our mind, our emotions, that need to be re-educated, retrained. Yes. Because by the time I get to, day 40 of it, if I've given up, I'm doing the quick sort of catalog of times and things I've given up in my head. Yes, I've been consistently better at day 40 than I am at day 3. Like, there have been times where I've given up something specifically. In day 2, I did it. Not because I'm like, forget it, I'm not doing this Lent. It's just because I do it all the time. Right. It's the way that I function. And so if you're hearing, "Oh, foolish Galatians," don't automatically take on shame. That's not your identity, by the way, anyway. It's how easy it is. Sometimes because we want to believe the lie and go that, and sometimes it's just soul muscle memory that we have to sort of retrain, but we don't even retrain that through surrender. In that way, because that's why I love that Galatians passage. I love the Galatians passage because it was a reminder of that process of what we called on Sunday of sanctification is progressive. Like, here are the Galatians, and that passage makes it clear they accepted surrender for their eternal destiny, and it implies, if it's not very clear, that at some point they were accepting surrender as their sanctification, and then somehow, either intentionally or muscle memory, they're going on back.
Got fooled.
Going on back. And I think we've all done that.
Yeah. And so you said something on Sunday. I put it here in the notes. Well, you probably said something on Sunday. I'm going to say it now.
Right? I'm going to say it now. It was in the notes. You said I said it.
Right. But you said the problem is not the absence of power, which for many of us is what feels like is the actual problem.
Correct.
Is somebody sold me a bill of goods on this life with Jesus, and it's just not paid off as promised. That I was promised power. I was promised there would be power. I was promised there would be transformation. I ain't seen it yet. Can I get this returned and get my Amazon credit back? The problem is not the absence of power. The problem is our resistance to surrender to a different power source.
Right.
There's so many times that I've heard well-intentioned people use Philippians 4:13 that you just referenced as sort of, I'm strapping the Jesus Duracell battery to my back because then I can do all things through the Jesus battery that strengthens me, rather than surrender to a different power source that truly guides and directs my life. And that's the difference.
So look at the way that Philippians 4:13 is phrased. I can do all things through Christ. And I think the way is, certainly when we get it out of context and wrong, we live this way. Christ can do all things through me. And while in some ways those can be synonymous terms, that's not usually what we're thinking. That, just empower me to supercharge my brokenness, right? Make my bad habits more effective bad habits, right? Instead of, teaching me or swinging the hammer correctly, just teach me how to swing it harder, incorrectly. It'll have the same effect, whatever it might be. I think lots of times, here's one of the things I love about sports, that in most cases, just trying harder gets better, which is why I hate golf.
Yeah.
Right? Golf is one of the few sports, John, that just swinging harder makes it worse.
Yeah.
It makes it worse. You have to have a complete reorientation about things in order to do it well. I think, every analogy falls short. We just want to keep swinging poorly. Just give me more power to do that. And that it's a different power source. There's so many analogies. I was thinking about this, John, that could play out. And, you talked about this idea of surrender. And I want to kind of slide into a little bit because I know, again, we've talked off podcast. And by the way, John and I, Lee and John, Mike and John, and anyone else who might ever join here, we probably talk equally as much off podcast as we do on podcast about a lot of these things. But I want to talk about this idea of surrender and how even saying the word surrender, for some of us, we have as naturally uncomfortable response to surrender as I do the word moist. It's not a great word. It's not a great word, right? Like some of you right now, I just said the word moist. Someone keeps saying it just to, get an email or two. And you're just like, could you stop? Could you not say that word? Surrender for us, does the same way.
Yeah, it really does. And again, it's, you can zoom this back out at a macro level to so many of our fundamental issues with God. We've talked before any number of times on this platform about how we were never meant to have a transactional relationship with God. We're meant to have a relational one. And yet there's something about the transactional one that I just love because it lets me be in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
God lays out the parameters. If you do this, you get that. If you don't do this, you don't get that. And you choose. Great. I choose a couple of option A and one or two from option B, and I get life that I'm okay with making these sacrifices to get these rewards. And that is fundamentally not the life of surrender. The life of surrender is, God, you lead, I'll follow, as we read in Mark. If you really want what I'm offering, follow me. Paul in Philippians finishes with, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But the verses leading up to that are his description of where he followed God and what God helped him to learn experientially about himself and about Jesus. And so he says things like, I was never in need, for I've learned to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing because God has led me to places where I've had to learn to live on almost nothing. And I've learned to be content with everything because God has led me to places where there has been an abundance for a period of time. And I have had to learn to be someone who can handle abundance without loss of connection to the one I'm following. I've learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it's with a full stomach or empty, with plenty or with little, because I've been brought to those places by the one who leads me. And so I know I can do everything through Christ, the one who gives me strength, because I've learned to follow him. He's not my Duracell battery. He's my Lord. He's the one I follow. And yet so often I want to come to the table with Jesus and lay out my demands in the form of requests and supplications, but really they're my demands. This is what I want, Jesus, and this is what I think is a good idea, and this is what I want you to do for me. And I'd love for you to notarize that. And if you're not willing to just notarize that outright, I would love for us to negotiate a little bit, and you tell me which of these I need to let go of, and in return, what you're willing to offer as a compromise. And what I seriously struggle with, personally and as a representative of humanity, is Jesus, you are Lord. I will go where you go. I will do what you do. I will eat what you eat. I will sleep where you sleep. I will say what you say. I will receive what you give. And that is the life I want. That's the difference between power that changes my circumstances and the power that comes from changing my source of life.
So, John, there's this analogy that we use here at Christian Fellowship Church, and if you're catching this podcast and don't know, it originates out of Christian Fellowship Church in Ashburn, Virginia. That's where it is, but we've used it on this platform over and over again to help identify, I think, this interaction between what it means for him to be our power source, but not go too far on the other end that says, well, I don't do anything. Because surrender isn't passivity.
Right.
It's an act of obedience to what he's called, so that when his power, we work through his power, then it does something. And it's this rowboat, raft, and sailboat is this analogy that we've used. And if this is the first time you're hearing it, great. If it's the 37th time, I'm just going to say it again real quick. If you think about the vessel, think about us as being the vessel, okay? In a rowboat, we're both the vessel, but there's oars, and we power it. We're the power source. In a raft, there is a vessel. We sit there, but there is really just, we're sort of moved wherever the wind kicks the current to go, but it doesn't do anything. In a sailboat, on the other hand, it's a much more interplay. If you do your part and raise the sails and no wind comes, the power, the Holy Spirit, well, you're still not going anywhere. But if you don't do your part and the Holy Spirit comes through, not that God can't move us wherever he wants to move us. He can. But more consistently, what he does is he works with our choices of surrender, so that if the power comes through and we've not done our part of raising the boat sails, then we've got a problem as well. We're not going that. But the challenge is, John, for me personally, is I am still learning where I am actually calling it sail raising, and it's really oar driving in disguise, right? You were talking about that we go to God and we said, can you notarize the plans and those sort of things? And I've realized that as you were talking about that, I had this analogy in my head. I think maybe all of us have had a boss who have sort of come in and said, hey, I've got some suggestions for you. And you realize these are not suggestions. You can frame it however you want, but you realize if you don't do this, the person in authority over you is going to be upset, frustrated, and it could result in, ultimately maybe not being employed there eventually. Okay. Do we come into God with that way, from the position of authority, like, God, if you don't do this, I say I want you to notarize them, but if you don't do them in the way that I think you should, I'm mentally out, or right. I'm going to, versus it's not actually suggestions. It's not coming and saying, hey, I think, and being open to him going, no, I'm not going to do it that way. It's we've come in thinking that he needs to do it this way. Otherwise, he isn't who I think he is in that way. And so I think you bring out this great point. I know that surrender often happens in stages. And change happens in stages. And this goes back again, John, to something that we often say at this podcast platform, is that we understand that physical growth of any type, whether it's, I want to grow stronger, I want my cholesterol to go down, whatever it might be, it is a process. Yep. And the same God that created our physical process created our spiritual process. But because we know God can do miracles, and he can, by the way, he's cleared people's cholesterols in miracles. More often than not, he clears it by doing other things. Yeah. The interaction of the sailboat scenario. Mm-hmm. We almost exclusively expect him to change the way we surrender, and boom, immediately I wake up and I don't struggle. Right. But that's actually not how it works. I've never met someone that has actually worked that way. I'm sure there's someone out there, and certainly God has the power to do that. Yeah. I've just not experienced it in my life working with anyone, and it's certainly not true in my life. So I just say something like this: all right, Jesus, I surrender my whole life to you. No, I don't. Like in my head I do. Right. Like in my head I do, but I'm not even aware, John, of sometimes where there's a lack of surrender. Right. I'm not even aware of that. Going back to those Galatians, maybe they didn't even realize the muscle memory until Paul goes, hey, you're kind of being foolish, assuming that's the context of how he delivered that, right? You're being foolish. Don't do that, right? I don't know. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they did. Going back, look it up. Tell me if they did. Right. But I know there's in my life plenty of times where I'm like, oh, I've surrendered my whole life to you. And Jesus like, really? By the way, when I said really, that was my interpretation of Mike Haynes, if you've ever seen him on this platform. Going, really? Did you really? Yeah,
nice.
Exactly.
Nice. That was good.
Thank you.
Yeah, and again, we want things to be that easy, right? God, I forgive everyone for everything as my prayer of forgiveness. And now I'm good, right? That's
exactly.
unrealistic.
Yeah.
But it's an invitation into the process of, God, my desire is to forgive everyone for everything. Where do we need to start?
Yeah, because then I think then God goes, okay, and I didn't mean to hijack you again. I feel like I'm doing a lot today. So go ahead, say that. Say God.
Well, and so then when we talk about surrender, the heart desire to Jesus, I want to surrender my whole life to you. That doesn't solve all the problems. That introduces us to the journey of, I want to surrender my whole life to you. Where do we start?
Yeah. Okay, Brian. So let's talk about your finances. No, I didn't want to talk about that right now. I wanted to talk somewhere else. Well, no. You know, like a lot of your heart, Brian, and maybe somebody listening around your trust and surrender to me is how you look at your finances.
Yeah.
Right? And that's one that I've struggled with my whole life. Yeah. You know, that please don't ask me to surrender this, because even though I know you're the one that provides for me, it feels a whole lot better when I feel like I'm the one that's rowing the boat on this, you know? And so he invites me. But the interesting thing when it comes to finances, he never woke up one day and said to me, okay, so today you're going to go from, on a scale from 0 to 100, maybe an 8 in surrender, to I'm going to have you do 100, right? And again, and not that God can't do that, but it's not how he typically works. And in fact, specifically with finances, I've met with some people before. They're like, oh, I've not surrendered at all. I'm going to surrender right now. And they completely changed their whole life in that way. But that wasn't what God was asking them to do at the time. He was going to act this step. And then what happens, it all falls apart. Yeah. Not because God doesn't want them to surrender that, but they didn't walk through the process God had for them to learn wisdom in that surrender.
Right. And that's exactly it. And even that desire for God to just sort of whoosh this. Yeah. Like I wake up one day and my finances are no longer a place of challenge and struggle for me. That really just reveals my unwillingness to surrender.
Now you're meddling. Would you stop that?
I know. It reveals my unwillingness to surrender. I don't want to do the hard thing. I want you to do the easy thing so I don't have to do the hard thing. And that reveals my unwillingness to truly surrender and go where he goes and do what he does. And I'm not saying this is the person that arrived. I'm just saying this is the person who now sees this more clearly than I did before.
Isn't it amazing how we can talk towards our spiritual life and go, nah, I don't want to work that way. But we could take a version of this same story and put it in a practical life. So I'm going to take in practical life. And I think that I've done this with my kids. Both my kids are old enough to drive now. It freaks me out a little bit. One of my kids has a vehicle, but I didn't just hand them a vehicle and all that sorts of. There were some things that went along with it. Why? Because you don't appreciate something at the level if you don't go through the process. And I think we've all met people. We live in Loudoun County. It doesn't lack in affluence. And I've watched some very young children have some vehicles that cost as much as houses do in some parts of their, and they drive them in a way that lacks appreciation. Right? And a lot of us with wisdom say you probably shouldn't do that. You should, give them a less expensive car if you're going to give it away, or have them, right, so they learn to appreciate what happened. But when it comes to our spiritual life, I don't want to appreciate and learn to trust you as my father. Right. I just want you to give me the nice car or whatever, in that sort of analogy. We go, hold on a second. Why is it? And I think it goes back to this fooling ourselves. I think because I don't really want to surrender in the way that he wants me to surrender, because that's the key. Yes, I want to surrender in this way, which even then I'm like, just strap the battery pack on the back of me. But we can look it over here sometimes and see it so clearly, but in our own life, when we turn it around and go, I always go back to in 2 Samuel when Nathan does this thing to David and he tells him about the sheep and that sort of stuff. And David's like, yeah, that's awful. And he goes, you're the guy, right? Right. Like we look at that and go, yeah, that's awful for the kids. To have that, and you turn the mirror like, nah, that's what we're doing.
You're the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If we go back to Exodus 23, God's brought his people, into on the cusp of entering the promised land. And he tells them, I'm going to go before you. I'm going to drive out your enemies. Plot twist. I'm not going to drive them all out at once. And this is actually my kindness towards you, because if I drove them all out at once, you're not actually ready to occupy the whole of the land that I promised you. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to drive them out little by little. I'm going to go before you. I'm going to do the heavy lifting, but you have to follow me and grow in your capacity to steward what I'm giving you. And as you grow in your capacity to steward what I have fought for you, I will give you more because my desire is to increase your capacity. You're like, but wait, we're going to have to fight? Yeah, but don't worry, I'm going to go before you. But we're going to have to fight? Yeah, but I'm going to go before you. Can we revisit this? Yeah. Can you just clear the whole thing out? And then we'll take as much as we can. And then when you feel like we're ready, you just go before us again and clear the whole thing out. And we'll take and we have to come back to God's focus is our growth, our sanctification, our increasing capacity to not just act like, but to be at an identity level, at a capacity level, more like the one that we are modeled after. And so that comes through surrender. And that comes through the death of my old way and the death of my old life so that I can receive this new life, so that I can live from this power source that I was always meant to live from, rather than the source of myself, which is very, very limited. And so that brings us to this place of, Jesus, I want to surrender my life. I don't actually know how to surrender my life. I know how to say the words. I don't know how to do the thing. I know you will go before me, and I know that you will help me claim a little bit more of the life I'm meant to have until I can grow into my capacity, because that's actually what you care about. It's not the solving of the problem. It's the restoration of identity. And so sitting with questions like, Jesus, where do I need to surrender? What specifically do I need to surrender? What does surrender look like here? I've never been here, Jesus. We've never expanded things this much to the point where I'm once again painfully aware of the fact that I can't do this on my own. Jesus, can we go back to where I can do this on my own? Nope, that's not the plan. The plan is to take you further so that you recognize once again, you can't do this on your own. Jesus, what does it look like to surrender to you here, to trust you here, to rely on you as my source here? What in me needs to die so that more of your life in me can do what it needs to do? And so on Sunday, Brian, you laid out what surrender looks like. Dependence, listening and obeying, trusting, confessing and repenting.
Yeah.
So when we look at dependence, one of the things that popped out for me, I don't know if this was anything you intended, but it's where I took it here.
Sure.
It's we sometimes need to first deal with a bad definition that we have of dependence. Because when we hear things like, you have needs, you have a need for God that you cannot satisfy on your own. You need God. I think that often makes us feel like we're needy. And that rather than surrendering, we're fighting against the very invitation that God's extending, because we feel like I'm not supposed to need. Need feels like neediness, and neediness is bad.
Yeah.
And so a helpful reframing for this: infants, particularly in the womb, have need. They are not self-sufficient, and they're not supposed to be.
Yeah.
They are literally attached to their mother through an umbilical cord, through which everything they need is given to them. They are not supposed to be productive in the womb. That is the life you are always meant to live with God. If you picture yourself with an umbilical cord to God, that is the life you are meant to live.
Yeah, Jesus in John chapter 15 uses the analogy of the vine and the branches. That's this stuck in that way. But for some people, we're already, feeling uncomfortable with that. And I'd like to suggest that we might be feeling uncomfortable because there's a lie that we believe. And one of them is that we're designed to be independent. One of the things that the United States of America excels at is telling us that we should be independent people. And there's some aspects of that that's unbelievably true. But we were never designed to go from being parent-dependent to independent. parents are designed to show us our dependency on God, so that when we're adults, we don't depend on our parents, but we still depend on God. And so we think needy in an identity statement.
Yeah.
But need is actually a behavioral truth, not an identity negativity in that way. And I think that's really, really, really hard, because some of us have tried to get a false sense of identity from our self-sufficiency, which is no wonder it all comes crashing down when things outside of our control,
Yeah.
right, go apart, or things inside of our control that we missed. You know, we can't, as I said on Sunday, unstick ourselves, and we were never meant to. Like, we don't need more strength, is that we need more surrender in that way. But even sometimes, John, as I was thinking about what you're saying, is I'm always amazed at how the lies that I believe can sneak back in very quickly, even after I accept a truth.
Yeah. So
I'm going to use maybe an inefficient analogy, but we've talked about this before. You have tools and you can fix things. I do not have tools, and I'm not good at fixing things. So say all of a sudden you know that I need the power to do something in my home, and you have the tools to do it. I'm just going to make something up, and you're probably going to laugh. A bandsaw, right? Like, I know kind of how it works, right? You give me the bandsaw, but now I feel ashamed to go, John, you've given me the power, but I don't even know how to use this power. I feel, it sneaks right back in. Now I have to do it myself. Now you've given me a thing, and now the next thing it comes on. We do the same thing with God. We're like, you have given me your power source, but I don't even know how to surrender, so I'm going to try to figure out how to surrender on my own. Instead of going back to God and going, all right, you need to help me even understand what it means to actively surrender. And it does mean this idea of dependence. What if we got up every day, just practice this, a real practical thing, one of the things I was trying to say on Sunday, good morning, God, whatever, however you have that conversation, and then say, apart from you today, I actually can do nothing. Apart from you today, that isn't a declaration of defeat. That's a declaration of dependence, because it's not saying I am nothing, and it's not saying I'm trying to do anything apart from you, but let me have what you do through you, not you try to super in charge me. And sometimes just the little starts, right? A process starts with a statement, right? And then I guarantee if you're like me, it won't be long after they make that statement like, I tried to do that on my own today. And sometimes we can go a long time doing things in our own power before we realize the insufficiency. So it really does. Your need doesn't diminish your value any more than any of us to say a baby in a womb. Like, how worthless is that? I can't believe that.
Can't feed yourself.
Come on. No. No. And again, some people are already offended that, like, if we called them a baby, right? Like, that's not what I'm supposed to be. That's why I went by to this idea of, like, it's never designed for us to move from parent dependence to independence.
Yeah.
Parents are designed to show us our dependence on God when it works well.
There's there's a reason he introduces himself primarily as Father.
Yeah.
And that he refers to us primarily as his children. And it's not because we're needy. It's because we have need that only he can fill. And I know I was in a hurry to grow up. I was in a hurry to be independent. And so there were large parts of my need that I overlooked that my parents were filling. And I was so focused on what I was able to accomplish on my own. And I translated that directly into my life with God.
Yep.
And so one of the things that we need to be aware of is our dependence, which then brings us to the second part of the process, our need to listen and obey. Because as we go back to Jesus talking about the need to lay down the self-life if we want to follow him, our desire to surrender is the beginning, not the end. And it then allows space for Jesus to go, that is something that needs to be surrendered.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what surrender looks like here. And so you said we have to pay attention to conviction and to prompting. And that's not scolding.
No.
And that's not the spiritual beatdown. And that's not, I can't believe you haven't figured this out. It's the kindness of God who, again, back to Exodus 23, goes before us and expands what we are then able to steward. And he goes, it's now time. You're now equipped. Your growth is sufficient for this to now be something we can overcome and you can maintain. And so this is the ongoing process of our life. greater and greater surrender as our capacity for surrender increases, as our willingness to let the self-life die increases. And so pay attention to conviction and prompting. Pay attention to, and I like how you said this on Sunday, to when he interrupts our natural reactions. Mm-hmm. When the thing that I'm just accustomed to doing, I notice one day God seems to be highlighting as, why do you do that? Mm-hmm. And again, it's the same, we struggle with the same language sometimes with when God shows up for Adam in the garden. Adam, where are you? Versus, Adam, where are you? Mm-hmm. Right? Why do you do that? Versus, do you know why you do that?
Yeah.
And would you be willing to consider a different way?
While I'm open to this list of 4 things, dependence, listening, obeying, trusting, confessing, repenting, not being linear, in my head, they're very linear. And part of the reason why I put them in that way is if I wake up in the morning, John, and I say, apart from God, I can do nothing, and I accept that dependent-wise, my ability and my desire to listen and to obey increases. Because if I wake up in the morning and I don't recognize my dependence, more often than not, and try to live from it, I only go back to listen and obey when my own power source isn't working, and it's in case of emergency break glass. Yeah. Right? And so part of this really does start with, like, if I don't live from that place of dependence and surrender, my listening and obeying goes down. I tend to go, I've tried everything I can. Well, okay, God, what do you have to say? And God may have often, if I would have stopped to listen and obey. And again, the answer, and we've talked about this in classes that we teach, we talk about here on this platform, like the answer isn't, well, that can't be God because it's not what I wanted to hear. The answer is it absolutely be God. If it lines up with Scripture, it brings fruits of the Spirit, it's wiser than you. Biblical communion is a list of tests that we go through that help that. But too often we don't even get to this stage because we don't live from that place of dependence. So starting there, listening, obeying, and then God might just say, hey, I got something for you today that is going to show you how I take care of you. I think there's a lot of reasons why that Jericho was the first town that they conquered in the Promised Land. Number one, because they could not do it on their own. Could not, right? AI is the next one. It shows the problem. We've talked about this in the past. They couldn't do it on their own. And it shows what he was going to do if they were willing to listen and obey, even in something that was crazy. Mm-hmm. Okay. Think about that. You think in our own lives, like if you were going to fall down the walls and do all this for me, why wouldn't I just go back to you and ask how to do this thing over here too? I think obviously there's so many things we could talk about why Jericho was first, even geographically. But I think there's some deeper premises there. He was trying to teach them about what it means to, you've still got to take the land, but I'm going to show you, if you're dependent on me, I can do amazing things. Listening and obey. But then trust, right? Yeah. So because this is where the tension comes in. I think for me, I say, all right, God, apart from you, I can do nothing. I depend on you. I listen and obey. But then without even sometimes knowing, I've obeyed, but then it's not happening in the timing or the way that I didn't even know sometimes. I was presupposing that when I listen and obey you, God, this is going to happen this way in this time, right? So if I'm listening and obey you with my finances, that means that my finances may never struggle. Hold on a second. I thought I listened and obeyed with you. That isn't this. Do we believe that God is still working even when his timing and his desires look different than we want, instead of all of a sudden going back to the analogy of using the rowboat again? And trust is only grown through difficulty. It's not grown. Yes. It's not grown in a vacuum. Yeah. Like you don't learn to trust someone just by going, hey, I trust you. I suggest don't do that. Otherwise, my name is Brian, and I have some land for you in the Everglades I would love to talk to you about. Right? That's how the scams work. Yeah. And you see God's willingness to take people through challenging situations so that they develop trust. Mm-hmm. That's what he does with the Israelites before Jericho. They have all this wandering in the wilderness, and God supernaturally provides food for a couple million people for the duration of that wandering, even as they're being a little bit rebellious. Yep. And by a little bit, I mean more than that. And then he leads them into this place where they've moved from total dependence, couldn't even feed themselves, to a battle that they might feel like they could have tried to fight on their own. Yeah. But there was a willingness to recognize maybe there's another way.
But then, as you said, muscle memory kicks in, and notice how quickly they go, okay, now we're past the point of dependence.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, God must intend for us to do this on our own.
Yeah.
And as you so often say, they get AI'd.
Mm-hmm.
And so trust is ongoing because we are constantly led into places where we recognize our need, and we recognize our need to trust. And so this then brings us to the place, much like after Jericho, after they get AI'd, the need to confess and repent, the reversion to my way, the reversion to the self-life, the reversion to self-sufficiency, the reversion to don't bother God, the reversion to God expects me to, the reversion to anything other than God, you are my source of life, and I am limited, and I can't do anything without you. God, what are we doing today? What else are you inviting me to let go of because it's holding me back from the life and life to the full that you're inviting me into? This isn't just sin management. This is, God, there is an entirely different way to live if you are truly my source of life. And I'm willing to give you access to everything and show me over time how to live without that so I can live with more of you. And you probably said it on Sunday, and we're going to close it with this. Surrender doesn't mean doing nothing. It means stopping our attempt to power the story ourselves and learning to respond to the Spirit who is already rewriting it. We don't have to fix it. We don't have to figure it out. We come back to the one who came to us from heaven, died for us, and was brought back to life to show us there's another way. There's another life. And there is a source that you were always meant to live from and be in connection with.
Yeah.
Do you want that? And if you do, will you give up your life to have it?
Yep.
And that's the beauty of Easter.
Yeah, that is the beauty of Easter. And that's one of the things we've been trying to do in this series, is to help us understand that the resurrection isn't just a theoretical thing that we can know about, but it's power for eternity and power for now. It gives us hope. That gives us a new identity. And then again, as we're going to talk about as we get to Easter Sunday, we're going to take next week off. So if you're listening here on the podcast, we're not going to have a podcast next week that's around this. I'm not sure if John, sometimes he'll dig out an archive and put that up. We haven't talked about it, so hold that in suspense. But we're going to, get at this idea, especially on Resurrection Sunday, that, it is still something for so many of us that we walk in our best clothes on Sunday of Easter and still feel like we got to go back into the old sweatpants way of living as soon as we live out. And it's one of the things I love about Easter, all the kids' clothes. But you know what I love after that, John, is the after pictures when the clip ties are off and the hair in the mud and all that sort of stuff. Like, God has given us a whole new way of living. We don't have to go back. We don't have to go back. And that's how much he loves us and cares for us. And if you'd love to talk about that, know that we'd love to talk about CFC Wired, Faith Forward at CFC Wired, so we can get to us. But also know that you can ask him. He'll tell you. Yeah. Ask him. Ask God.
Yep. Yeah. So as always, thanks for letting us be a part of your journey. Thanks for letting us be in process and being a part of ours. Happy Resurrection Sunday.